Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw The Bad Guys come out at number one once again for the second week in a row, also adding 33 theaters and holding 33% for a very strong hold, and probably one of the best week 1 to week 2 holds that we've seen in quite a while for a film that has come out at over 4,000 screens and is now up to $44 million domestically. We'll talk about that. Talk about Sonic the Hedgehog 2 continuing to do very well, continuing to outpace that of the original film. Why Fantastic Beasts has a very, very large domestic box office problem, and also what the fate of The Northman, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and other films are because of these numbers. Anyway, before going any further, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So as I mentioned, The Bad Guys came in at number one with $16.1 million, a 33% hold, bringing its total domestic run to $44.4 million domestically. Very, very strong showing for this film, and it is definitely putting it on pace to make its money back unless the wheels fall off. And based off of what I've been seeing as far as the comment section of people who have seen the film, they, for the most part, are generally enjoying the movie. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 from Paramount, in its fourth week of release, only dropped from 8 theaters, showing that this film still has a lot of life left in it. Also had a very impressive hold, only dropping 27% from last weekend. So in this dead weekend at the box office, this film showing itself to be quite a long-range and long-term contender with $11.3 million in its fourth week of release, bringing its total domestic run to $160.9 million. Very impressive numbers for a film that indeed put me to sleep. Not nearly as impressive is Fantastic Beasts: The Secret of Dumbledore from Warner Brothers, which made an $8.3 million third week release, which in the grand scheme of things compared to the previous week is not all that bad, but because its opening weekend was incredibly weak, because it had a pretty strong, had a pretty high week 1 to week 2 drop off, this film is in a lot of trouble domestically. It's only dropped out of 283 screens, and so that's some good news. However, with the release of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness coming out next weekend, and that's set to dominate the box office in a lot of ways, let's just say Fantastic Beasts is going to run out of a lot of room, not just at the various movie theaters that it's still available at, but also in the number of people who are actually still wanting to go see this movie. Domestically, as you can see, it's only made $79.5 million after 3 weeks of release. The only news surrounding this film, as far as any sense of hope, is the international market, but just like with the domestic market next weekend, that is also going to be completely decimated because Doctor Strange is just going to own the day. The Northman came in once again at number 4, making $6.3 million, and even though that hold from its first week of release, now its second week of release, of 49% of $6.3 million domestically, bringing its total domestic run to 22.8, is definitely more on the stronger side, and it actually added 50 screens. Because of its massive budget, this film is, let's just say, not in a very good position to make its money back. And I know that there are some people that still don't quite get why I obsess over films making their money back or not. I have a whole video dedicated specifically to The Northman and why the success or failure of the box office of The Northman is so important. Some have tried to fight back saying, no, well, there's still going to be independent films that are made, and that might be true, but you're not going to see as many films, or at the very least, you're not going to see Focus Features or other production companies that were behind this film put out as much money for a project like this if it is shown, and this is what currently is happening, that they do not make their money back. That, I think, is what needs to be focused on here. That does not mean the film is bad. That does not mean that there will not be any other independent films that will be coming out in the future. What it does mean, though, is for people like Robert Eggers and for films like this from this studio, that again, studio executives are going to be a little bit more hesitant to put that much money behind any given project. And whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to you, but whether or not that is something that's going to have a long-term impact on the types of films that get told and how much money and how much production value those films get, it does have a very major impact on it. And so that's why I continue to focus on it as such. But based on these numbers and based on the very high number it needs to make in order to make its money back, it's just pretty much out of reach at this point in time. Rounding out the top 5 is Everything Everywhere All at Once. I was able to see that this week. A review is up on the channel from A24, and it is, again, continuing to be not just weird as a film itself, but also continuing to be weird in its release as well. Not only is it continuing to add theaters, now adding another 80 theaters, but also it is the only film in 6 weeks of release to actually see an increase from week to week. So this film increased 2% from its 5th week of release and also bumped itself back up into the top 5. And even though the film still has a ways to go in order for it to break even, it is at a position where it's at just enough of a loss for one to make a good, compelling argument that Blu-ray 4K sales and post-theatrical release could end up making its money back, or at the very least, it would be enough for a potential tax write-off. And it's just amazing to me how well this film is doing based on its strategy. It makes complete sense when I think about the movie itself, because the movie is fantastic. The movie is solid. And even though it definitely goes on the weird side, it does not go nearly as weird as The Northman does, and it at least has a story that one, and I think even general audiences could potentially follow. And I think that is being shown here by the fact that it continues to do well, it continues to be added to the theaters, and again, this release strategy, we'll see exactly what happens when an actual box office juggernaut comes out. But this film was even doing well when films like The Batman were out in major release. So again, movie to follow here as well. The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent in its 2nd week of release saw a 45% drop, so a relatively strong hold, making another $3.9 million for a total of $13 million domestically. And even though the film is definitely one of the more entertaining films of the year, definitely a solid film, I believe I gave this film a solid B. It is also one that is not making nearly as much money as I feel that they thought it would. I think that they thought more of the Nicolas Cage fans would come out and see this film, and that's not really what's going on here. And because the budget, though not large, is also sizable enough for this to not be that much of a splash and not much of a recoup of the investment, let's just say things are not looking that great for this film either. The Lost City continuing to drop off, again starting to drop out of theaters, dropping another 10%, so not a terrible hold from week on, but as I mentioned before, with the release of Doctor Strange next week, we're probably going to see some larger drop-offs here if I had to guess. Memory, which is the newest film this weekend, again, Liam Neeson action film, don't quite understand it, $3.1 million in its opening. And let's just say that it's going to drop off like a rock, because that's just what all of the Liam Neeson action films have been doing from Open Road. I don't quite understand why they keep on putting any amount of money behind him, let alone why they keep on putting behind him for action films, especially action films that he's basically done before. If you've ever seen the film Unknown, for instance, and you look at the trailer for this, you think to yourself, there's not a whole lot of difference here in the story. What are you doing? And it's not that they're making money. If these films were little cheap movies and tons of people were going to see Liam Neeson because they wanted to see Liam Neeson in an action film, maybe you would have an argument. Maybe there would be a strategy there, but that's not really what's going on in this instance. And the number 9 spot this week from Sony Pictures is Father Stu in the 3rd week of its release. A 34% hold, $2.2 million, dropping out of 229 screens. So again, not doing all that great, but we don't have a budget yet for this film, so hard to say whether or not the film is a success or not. If it's on the lower end, like a $10 to $15 million film, then it is actually a decent position. Or if it is a $30 to $40 million film, which to me sounds a little bit more likely, then it still has a ways to go in order to make any money back or any return on its investment. And then rounding off the top 10, we have Morbius, also from Sony, $1.5 million, a 35% hold, but it is just dropping like a rock. And yeah, it's looking like Morbius is going to end up being a financial loss and a financial failure, though enough to be able to make that up in in 4K, Blu-ray, etc. in the end and by the end of its run. The last one I'll mention is just rounding off again the top 11. There is Ambulance from Universal, dropping 35%, again dropping out of theater just like a rock, and I just don't quite understand why this film had to be shot the way that it did, because if this film had a different cinematographer, I would not be surprised that this film would have done a little bit better. But because it was so vomit-inducing in certain ways, just very, again, so much shaky cam to the point of making you feel sick, I can totally understand why people are just not going to see this film, or at the very least are not recommending this film. Looking at the worldwide totals for these films, The Bad Guys at $119.4 million worldwide, Northman at $41.6. So again, even though this would be good if this was a $10 to $15 million independent film, for a film that costs somewhere around $80 million, not nearly enough, unfortunately. Sonic the Hedgehog 2, $302 million, puts this film in a very good position to be able to surpass that of the original. In fact, let me go ahead and try and pull that up real quick, because I believe the film will have maybe already have surpassed it. Let's see. I don't want this chart. I don't like your comparison charts when you do it by the franchise. Let's do this one. I like it when it's head-to-head adjust for inflation, because you all know I love to adjust for inflation. So the films cost roughly around the same amount of money the opening weekend. For the second one was $72 million versus the $58 million there. The domestic box office already for Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is vastly outperforming that of the original film, which came out in 2020, and the international box office is very close to surpassing that of the original film, and at $302.9 million, that means that this movie will indeed surpass that of the original within just the next few days. And as you see in the day-to-day market, this film is easily beating that of the original domestically, and that is not really all that much of a surprise. Even though I was not the biggest fan of either film, not really made for me, I can totally understand why this film is doing as well as it is. Again, Jeff Fowler was able to get a lot of people to stay true to him, to dedicate to themselves to him, to believe in him as a filmmaker because of what he did with the first movie, because he listened to the fans especially. And hey, it's starting to pay off in dividends. Not paying off nearly as much as Fantastic Beasts, which again, $250 million internationally. So the movie's making money internationally, but it's not making anything here. And if you really want to do a deep dive into these numbers, and you were to remember that when it comes to most films, they tend to get around 60% of the entire box office, but most of that is under the assumption that it's being released in the same amount of countries, and it's getting the same amount of money from different markets. When you look at a film like this, where it's so heavily skewed foreign, studios get a lot less from foreign countries than they do from the American market, especially within the first couple of weeks of release. And when the biggest numbers here are coming from places like Germany and Japan, and even 21.4 million from communist China, you start to realize and recognize that this film, even though this number is a bit high, because this number is so low. I mean, if this number was maybe like $150 million, we would be having a little bit of a different discussion. But because this number is looking like it may not even pass that of $100 million domestically, let's just say things are not looking very good for the long-term ramifications of this film. And this film could very well end up being a pretty massive flop. And as I said, next weekend, you got Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness coming out, which is going to dominate the box office. I just don't see a lot of room for this film to be able to hold on that much longer. If we were to go ahead and try and look at this film in comparison to some of the other ones, let's compare it to the previous film, and let's go ahead and make sure to adjust that for inflation. As you can see, the production value or the production numbers there are relatively similar. You have more theaters here for the Secrets of Dumbledore. The domestic opening weekend for Crimes of Grindelwald was a lot higher. You see the domestic box office was about twice as much as what it was now. International was about twice as much. So even though the international number might get up to the $300 million range, this number here might barely get to $100 million, and then you're looking at a film capping out around $400 million, which would be almost, again, to over $250 million less than the previous movie, which would be on track as to what I was projecting from the beginning here. But yeah, it's just not looking good for this. And if you look at the day-and-day comparisons, it is not even a single day. It has not even beaten that of the original film, and or rather that of the second film in the franchise. So yeah, this film not doing well domestically, and though it's making some money internationally, not nearly enough to make its money back. Everything Everywhere All at Once, I do highly recommend this film. Go check it out. Seriously, it's fantastic. It's weird. It's bizarre, but it's just so much fun. And I really hope that this film gets a little bit more love and support because it's not too far off. It just really needs kind of like a little bit of a major surge, as it were, at the box office to get to a comfortable position to be able to either be a write-off or to do well enough to maybe even make its money back or to break even, but it's still not quite there at this point. The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, the Nicolas Cage movie about Nicolas Cage, it's fun. I mean, it's fun. One of the reasons why I just wasn't really looking forward to it was because you had some of the actors in it I'm not really big fans of, but Pedro Pascal was actually likable in the film, so kudos to the director for actually being able to do that. And you also had, Tiffany Haddish in the film, who I just don't think is funny at all in the film, and luckily her role is incredibly limited, and so you just get a lot of Nicolas Cage. You also get a lot of the bromance between Nicolas Cage and Pedro Pascal, and they've got really great chemistry together on screen. Not enough, though, apparently, to bring people out to go see the film, which is at $14.9 million. Lost City at $114 million, as I've mentioned. Not really making much anywhere else. It's pretty much a flop. Memory at $3.1 million, not doing all that well. Father Stu, I don't know how it's made only $743 internationally, but hey, that's what the numbers is saying. Morbius, $161 million, has pretty much capped out, as has Ambulance, which might be able to push past $50 million, but that's pretty much all we can expect from that film. As far as some projections, we can look at Memory at $3.1 million opening, and we'll be able to make some projections on that film next weekend, while of course tracking just how big of a release Doctor Strange 2 will end up being, Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness, which again, many suspect to be somewhere between 150 and 200 million in just the domestic market alone. So it could be a pretty massive release there. When it comes to The Northman, now that we have the week 2 numbers, we can make some projections for this, Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and The Bad Guys. For The Northman, based on that $41 million number, I'm projecting the film will make somewhere between somewhere between $59 and $83 million at best, since this film needs to make closer to $200 million worldwide to break even. As I've said, this film being a flop is pretty much guaranteed. And again, that does not mean that the film is bad, but financially, it does not look good for Robert Eggers getting a film like this, at the very least from that studio, with that kind of money ever again. And it could also have that impact on some other independent films too. The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talents being $14 million means that the film will make somewhere between $21 and $29 million. Still a little off the mark of where it needs to be as well. The Bad Guys, however, much different story, with the $118 million in its second weekend, projected to make somewhere between $169.5 and $237.3 million in the worldwide market, which is a very good sign. It's a very good showing, and it means that the chances of that film making money is very, very high. If we're talking here about the projections of minimum loss and basically best case scenario, worst case scenario, Northman's best case scenario is only losing $70 million. Best case scenario is $84 million. So again, enough for this film to have some concerns for the studio. If we were talking Bad Guys numbers, right, if we were only at a $3 million loss, or if even we were at an Ambulance $11 million loss, if it even gets to that point, that would be one where you could say, yeah, it's a loss, but you can kind of write it off. 70 to 84 million is a bit too much there. Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, $27 million to $32 million loss. So again, not all that great for that film either. Because of the fact that even though it only cost $30 million, when you take into account that's 2.5 times the budget to break even, $75 million. Again, not making nearly enough to get to that point. But as I mentioned, The Bad Guys in a much better scenario here. Worst case scenario is that it loses $3.2 million. Best case scenario is that it makes $37.3. And with a 30% hold like it had this past weekend, which is, again, incredible for a film like this, that is, I think, something that they should be very excited about. I think that is something that you'll be forward to, and I would say that it making money is a lot more likely. Versus Fantastic Beasts, which had that massive range based off of the first 2 weeks, $59 million loss to $36 million gain, but based off of the numbers that we're seeing right now, it's at a $100 million loss, and I just don't see this film getting to the point of being able to make its money back. And if you want to see some of the current numbers as they stand, $95 million loss currently for The Northman, 40 for Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, $33 million for The Bad Guys. Again, by next weekend, I could see this film get cut in half again. Everything Everywhere All at Once, as I've mentioned, $42.6 million in the red, but that is low enough to get very close to that, hey, tax write-off, Blu-ray 4K release So again, go see that film. I do really highly recommend it. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 continuing to make profits. I can expect this film to make a lot more. So right now it's at 46.7. Probably will end up being somewhere between 50 and 75 million net gain, if I had to take a guess just right now. Ambulance is sitting right now around $30 million in the red. I don't see it doing that much better than that. Morbius is still at $15.6 million. So even though it's not the biggest flop in the world, this film was originally projected to make money. So the drop-off was a lot worse than what was originally anticipated. The Lost City still sitting at $42.7 million in the red. Not very good and not looking very good for that film. And those were the movies that I was actually able to provide updates for as far as the numbers. And so what are y'all's thoughts about this? Are you excited for Doctor Strange 2 next week? Would love to hear your thoughts on that. And also, what are y'all's thoughts about these projections for The Northman, Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and The Bad Guys? Have you seen any of those films, or even have you seen the newest film, Memory? If you have, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button on Odyssey, y'all all amazing and beautiful people. I should be having a May shout-outs video up either tonight after this video, or it might be the April video, because I'm still waiting on Patreon to process everything. And so if you see the old April video, that is the reason why. But once Patreon has finished processing everything, I will have the updated May video, because remember, some of the tiers have changed, and so therefore those shoutouts will change as well. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my members who are at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above on Patreon, Subscribestar, and Locals. So first on Patreon, Brandon, let's go Brandon, Christopher Bowman, Garrett Searles, Hymir Irie Hymason, Jacob from Holland, Jacob Juice, who you can check out on his Letterboxd. Jacob Juice is how you can find it. Jeffrey Toon, Joey Horn, Jonathan Carney, Laura, the Modern Major General, Story, Mad Mike Jackson, special shout out for him in a second, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Orange Hat Reviews, you can check out his channel, Orange Hat Reviews, Rosetta Allen, you can check out her channel as well, Stan Andrian, and Miss Martin Muses, who also has a YouTube channel. And a special shout out, as I mentioned, to Jacob Juice from Holland. Again, letterboxd.com/Jacob Juice for more information about him. And a special shout out to my members over on Subscribestar, Matt 317, Storm Tracker, The R, Fast Reaction, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. Thank y'all very much for supporting on Subscribestar. And to two of the members who are supporting me over on Locals, who asked for special shout-outs. First off, Minnesota hockey fan. Let's go. Let's get a hockey player. And UAB, Mad Dog, Mike Jackson for the win. Thank you very much for supporting me, and also Robert Barnes on Locals as well. Anyway, if you want a special shout out, and Brett D90 for that matter, if you want a special shout out at the end of every single video, please check out that top link at the very top of the video description. It'll give you more information about the different tiers and what you get every single month. Thank you guys for your love, for your patience for this month's shout out video as well. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.